What's good, YouTube? It's Rico here, and I'm actually doing a deck profile for once. So, this is one of the many decks I've been playing around in the February format, the February 2018 format. So it's just pretty much Spiral getting hit and Resort going to 1, making the deck so much more fragile and, in my opinion, not consistent enough to make it worth playing. Has just really opened up, like, all doors for this format for a bunch of different decks that I'm considering playing. There's like this one I'm considering. I'm still thinking on Magician, but I'm not sure how I feel about it. And then there's also Trickstar, True Draco, Metal Foes. And there's just a bunch of decks that I really am having fun playing. This is one that I initially wrote off, but the more I've been testing with it, it's actually a really nice deck, and it's got some neat things it can do. And that's Zefra. And so Zefra is something that's been really popular in the OCG, just because it's got a bunch of crazy plays with like Needlefiber and like Electromite and stuff. So I initially wrote this deck off because I felt like a lot of like the super crazy plays the deck had needed Needlefiber to be good, because in this deck, if you have Needlefiber, you can hit your opponent with like 4 disruptions in a single turn, where you have like the Yang Zing counter trap, and then you like summon TG Wonder Magician off a Needlefiber and use that Wonder Magician to pop something, and use that to make a Boxia and spin something back. And like, there's so much disruption this deck can do with Needlefiber that I felt like without it, the deck just really wasn't that good. But after discussing it with another user on Pojo, Semaphore, I realized, like, I was like, you know, I'll play around with it and see what I can find, and I slowly realized that this deck's actually got some cool stuff in it. I'm not sure if it's, like, amazing or, like, top-tier contention, but I could see it as a possibility, and it's definitely got some utility and some neat plays to it, even without Needlefiber. Like, Electromite still does a lot for this deck, and really I think that's where a lot of the things this deck can do come from. And it actually has a surprisingly easy time making Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon, which for all Pendulum decks right now is essentially the name of the game, is making that card. So yeah, so I've messed around with a bunch of ideas in this deck and bounced some ideas around, and this is what I'm looking at right now. So yeah, let's just get into it. And this is all like tentative because like it's still very much in testing. I don't have a regional until the end of March, so I don't even know what I'm playing then, but this is something I'm considering. So for the Zefra monsters, there's Zefrath. This is the best scale but the worst monster, because like you always want to have him in your scale, and it's usually going to be your high scale because you're going to dump Zefranio. But you're never going to summon this thing. I feel like you theoretically could, but there will probably never be a situation where you do. So, like, it's such a good card, but it's also, like, such a bad card at the same time. But, like, it is vital to the deck, and definitely something to play in 3. It's the only Zefra I play in 3, because everything else you can, like, search out in terms of utility and stuff. So, I play 2 of each of the Yang Zings, Zefranio and Zefroxy. These are more important than the other Zefras in terms of like getting your plays going, because Zefroxy lets you do synchro plays, and Zefranio searches your engine cards and your like counter traps and stuff. So you don't want to see multiples of them, and they're easily searched out, but you do want to see them, and generally if you open them with Zefrath or you open them with the different combo pieces, it helps make your plays more consistent because you can search other things you need. So yeah. And then I play 1 of each of the Ritual Beasts. I play Zefra and Pilica and Zefra Wendy. So Zefra Wendy is just... I see it generally as a late game. If you want to, like, if you draw it late game, you can, like, put a Zefrath or something back in your hand and then use that to set up scales again. Or if you draw it early, if your extra deck's loaded but you don't have enough spaces to, like, summon extra deck cards, you can just put 1 back in your hand and then Pendulum summon from there. Zefra and Pilica is not one that's normally used, especially in the OCG. Like, Zefra and Pilica is not used because, whereas Zefra Wendy puts the monster from the Esper back in your hand, Zefra Pilica summons one from graveyard. And that's, like, that sounds like it would not be useful in this deck because it's a Pendulum deck. Your monsters don't really go to the graveyard. But it does have some utility that I'll get into later. It has to do with other choices in the deck. So because of that, I felt like it was nice to have the 1 of Zefra and Pilica that I can grab whenever I need it. So, like, as a 1 of, it's not going to usually come up when I don't need it, but if I have the ability to search it and it's convenient, I can grab it. And, like, in test hands, it's actually been really nice having the 1 Zefra and Pilica, so, yeah. And then the last Zefras I play are 1 each of Zefra Thuban and Zefraxiton. So, what are their effects? They on their normal flipper pendulum zone, one of them pops a Zefra card and a set card, and one of them pops a Zefra card and a face-up card. Honestly, I never use those effects. The real draw of these guys, aside from Zefra Thurbin being searchable because it's a warrior for Rhoda, is the fact that they're level 4, which means with Zefraxi, you can turn them into a tuner and then make a level 7 synchro. And level 7 synchros are like the big play of this deck. So like that's why they're so important. And then you play one of each because like high skill and low skill, so whatever you need Zefrath to be. But like I don't think I've ever used their effects, but just the fact that the level 4 is really useful. And Zefraxton's got 1900 attack, so he's a decent beat stick, but mainly just their level 4. And that's all the Zefra monsters. It's 11. And then for other pendulums, I play 3 Darkworm and 2 Gate 0. This is a little different from the OCG, and this is like vital to the deck, just because like Gate 0 is the best low scale in the deck because it doesn't lock you out of non-Zefra monsters to pendulum summon, which is what all the Zefras do, except for Zefrath. So you want to see this practically every game, so that's why excuse me, I max out on ways to see Darkworm, which is like 3 Darkworms and then stuff to get to it that I'll get to in the spells. In the OCG, generally only 1 Darkworm is played, and it's because you don't want to normal summon it, because the idea is that you're going to dump it with Dragon Shrine or Foolish Burial, and you're going to revive it, and then you're going to play another Zefra monster, and you're going to make Electromagnet from there to go off. Because the like standard like bread and butter combo is like if you open a way to dump Darkworm, and you open a way to get to Oracle of Zefra, you can just go off and make a board, make at least a decent board. In TCG side, if it was OCG, it would be an absolutely busted board. But TCG side, it's a decent board that can be crazy depending on what else you draw with it, but that's a standard 2-card combo that you can do. So the reason I play 3 as opposed to the 1 in the OCG is that because the OCG has Needlefiber, they can make plays off of just Needlefiber without Darkworm. So like if you open just Armageddon Knight or Glow Up Bulb, you can make Needlefiber and do a play from there, but you can't do that in the TCG because we don't have Needlefiber. So Darkworm is a lot more important, and Darkworm and Gate 0 are both really important. So for that, I max out on Darkworm, and I also play more ways to dump him. So, yeah. And I was originally hesitant on doing this, but after it was Semaphore mentioned that he's yeah, he maxes out on Darkworm because it's so important to see, and I tried it out, I was like, man, this is actually really good. So yeah. And Gate 0 is also being level 7 is really helpful in making Vortex Dragon, so yeah. And that's all the pendulum monsters for non-ones. We have Armageddon Knight and Destrudo. So obviously in the OCG, one of the things this does is Armageddon Knight into Destrudo is a Needlefiber. It's still really useful here just because you can pendulum summon Armageddon Knight, get Destrudo, and make a level 7 synchro, which is like I said, the name of the game for this deck. That's its plan, is to make a level 7 synchro to set up board. So yeah, it's definitely really nice. You can search them with Rhoda, so you're essentially running 3 copies, but you never see multiples. And then even hard drawing and normal summoning him isn't necessarily the worst thing either. Although I generally try to pendulum summon him, but even mid to late game, if you just hard draw him and you Armageddon Knight Destrudo, make a level 7 synchro, that can be very useful if you make a Yazi or a Black Rose Dragon. So yeah, definitely really liking this even without Needlefiber. And then the last monster is Ash Blossom. So hand traps are kind of in a conundrum right now, where the way I see it, the 3 major hand traps where they have the most utility right now are Ash, Ogre, and Effect Veiler. And the conundrum comes from the fact that every single one of them has at least one matchup where they're not good. Out of the decks that people are projecting to be the best decks in the format, Ash hits just about everything, but it's not super great against Magician. It has utility in the matchup, but it's not one of the better cards to use against them. Veiler is also very versatile like that. Veiler hits a lot of matchups. It hits Magician, hits Trick Stars, provided they don't have Lycoris, and just stuff like that. But Veiler does nothing to True Draco, and True Draco over the past weekend of regionals did a lot of work. So I'm now projecting True Draco to be one of the best decks as well. And then Ogre, Ogre hits Draco and it hits Magician, but it does nothing to Trickstar really. And like it does, Ogre does hit a couple rogue matchups here and there, like ABC and such. So I decided I wanted to play some hand traps. That way I just had something for when I went second. And I felt like Ashe was the most versatile one because like Valor is versatile, and Valor arguably hits more relevant matchups because it actually hits Magician hard. It hits Trickstar hard, provided they don't have Likers. So like the only one that's going to hit Trickstar super hard really is like Droll and Lockbird, and Ogre, not Ogre, Ash Blossom. So I felt like, but the problem with Valor was that like it does nothing to True Draco, and I feel like this deck might actually have a problem against True Draco. I like looking over it. I'm not sure what I do about Masterpiece. So I didn't want to play Valor because of that. I was originally going to play Valor because I felt like Valor had the most utility because it also hits like Lightsworn. That is another deck I forgot to mention. And it hits Spiral if people still play that. But the relevance of True Draco makes me not want to main it unless I had like room for 6 hand traps, which I don't in this deck. There's some things I want to play that I just don't have room for. So I just feel like Ashe is a better choice in the main than Valor, and I think like even though Ogre hits Magician and hits Draco, I don't like that it's more likely than the other two to be dead in a specific matchup. Like Ghost Ogre doesn't do shit to Trickstar, and like it doesn't really do anything to Lightsworn. Like it slows Lightsworn down, but not nearly enough to matter. So I just felt like Ashe was the best one. I did consider doing 2 Ashe and 1 Valor because the level 9 Yang Zing Synchro upon destruction searches out any tuner, so you could search a hand trap. But the more I'm playing with the deck, the more I feel like just sitting on the level 9 Synchro by itself isn't really that good. So I'd rather just, like, the idea was that if I had Ashe or Valor in hand, I could search the other one for more disruption, but I don't think it really comes out that much. And if I have the Yang Zing Synchro on the board, and I have an Ashe in hand, I can just search Destrudo because it's any tuner. So, and that would be better because it would get my next play set up. So yeah, I just ultimately decided to do 3 Ashe. Obviously, if the format changes, that might be something different. And if there was a lot of Magicians at my locals, I'd probably consider maining Ogre or Valor. But I know that like there's like 3 to 5 Lightsworn players at my locals, and there's like a good probability that someone will waltz in with Draco because everybody had that like back in the day, and I doubt they got rid of it. So yeah, that's the monster lineup. I think it's 22 monsters, something like that. So for spells, we have Zefra Providence. This is the Super Rhoda. Its card's actually got a lot of utility. It grabs any Zefra card from your deck, so it can also grab like the field spell and the trap, but like also grabs monsters. And it also has the what's that card that Blue Eyes used where it searched something, but then also if it was in, I don't know if it was either Search or Revive, but it was also, if it was in the graveyard, protected from destruction once. Zefra Providence does that too, where, except for the turn where it was sent to the graveyard, so it's a little more fair, but you can banish it to prevent a Zefra from being destroyed, so that's neat. But mainly just the utility of it being a Rhoda for any Zefra card in your deck is really amazing. And like you can grab this, if you haven't played it, you can grab this off of Zefranio, and then play it, and then search another Zefra card, so that's really nice. And then 3 Shrine and 1 Foolish Barrel. You want to see Darkworm in the graveyard, so like you maximize the chances of opening this just to get it into the graveyard. And then if you do get another way to get Darkworm in the graveyard, or you just have Darkworm anyway, you can, or you draw it later in the game, you can dump Destrudo instead, and it's just as good. So definitely maxing out on the Dragon Foolish Burials is not a bad idea. And then, come on, deck. So for field spell lineup, I play 3 Terraforming, 3 Oracle of Zefra, and 1 Dragon Ravine. So originally I was doing just the Oracles and no Terraformings because Oracle of Zefra is a hard once per turn, so having multiples in your hand is cloggy. And I didn't feel it was as vital to the deck as something, say, like Union Hanger or Magical Meltdown or something like that. The deck can play without Oracle of Zefra. But I also think that Oracle of Zefra, because it is a Rhoda for any of your, like, this deck runs like a billion Rhodas, because like Zefra searches that, or Oracle searches any Zefra monster, Zefra Providence searches any Zefra card, so that's 6 Rhodas there. So I liked the idea of Terraforming because it would essentially give you 9 Rhodas, but I didn't want to risk clogging on these, so I figured how could I how could I make it so that Terraforming and Oracle don't clog as much? And originally I thought of Empowerment, because I'm an idiot. And I was like, oh, well, with Empowerment, if I run Dragodius the Empowered Warrior, I can ditch any card in my hand and summon a free Pendulum monster to make Electromite. And then I realized Dragon Ravine does the same thing and so much more. Because Dragon Ravine, you pitch anything in your hand, you can dump Dark Worm to get the summon, get the search. You can dump Destrudo if you already have Dark Worm. Like, if you have Dark Worm in hand, Ravine gets it to the graveyard. And so, essentially, if you open, like, Terraforming Oracle of Zefra and, like, Dark Worm, that's, like, a fucking insanely powerful play. So, Ravine, the one Ravine is definitely really nice, and this is why I play Zefra and Pelica, because there's really not much you want to discard in the deck besides Dark Worm. So, if you have Zefra and Pelica, or a way to get to Zefra and Pelica, and you have another Zefra in your hand, you can play Ravine, dump the Zefra, hit the, Dark Worm to the graveyard, revive their Dark Worm, search, then play Zefra and Pelica and revive whatever you dumped. And that has come up a lot in testing. So this was the I played Dragon Ravine, I was like, well, I need something to get the Zefras back. So like, well, what about Zefra and Pelica? And that's how that worked. It's been working really well. It's like the number of games where I get Dark Worm in the graveyard before normal summoning is incredibly high now. So it definitely works out favorably. So I'm big on this ratio for sure. And don't play Empowerment. Don't play Empowerment. That card is bad compared to Dragon Ravine. Especially because Empowerment conflicts with Dark Worm, because you get the Dragodius, which means your field's not clear for Dark Worm, so I don't know why I even thought that was a good idea. And then the last spells I play are Rhoda and Emergency Teleport. These are just utility, because Rhoda can grab Armageddon Knight or Zephyr Thubin. And Emergency Teleport will summon either of the Ritual Beasts from your deck, and that's like... Rhoda's just utility to grab Armageddon Knight, or like if you need the level 4 Zefra, you can do that too. And then Emergency Teleport helps make Electromite before you Pendulum Summon, because it just summons it to the board for free. So these are both really nice, and they definitely come in handy. That's all the spells. So for traps, I only play 9 Pillars and Divine Strike. You can search both of these, so you don't need any other traps. There is the one other Zefra trap, Zefra War. I've toyed with the idea of playing it, but I don't really care for it. It's a 1-for-1 spot removal that you can play from your hand if you have 2 Zefras in your scales, but that never happens, really. Because almost always you're going to have Zefrath and Gate 0 in your scales. If you have to scale another Zefra monster, it's a suboptimal play, really. And the reason I feel OCG plays 3 traps is because they still have Denglong, and Denglong searches 9 Pillars for you, so generally you summon Zefranio and you search Divine Strike, and then you search 9 Pillars with Denglong. So generally at that point, if you have one other thing you can search if you draw into one of the traps. And I think that's the idea with Zefra War and the OCGs, because they always search 2 traps. So if they hard draw 1, they still have 2 to search. But for us, we only search 1 trap because we don't have Denglong. So I think we only need 1, so if you hard draw 1, you can just search the other one. But these both definitely have utilities. Zefra Divine Strike is good late game, and also good if you're just ending a board that doesn't have a Yang Zing. And then 9 Pillars it triggers Zefranio, it triggers Yazi, it triggers Chaofeng to level 9. There's just they're both just really good, and I think they're both mandatory. But I don't think you need any other traps in the deck. Yeah, so that's the main deck. It's 40 cards. I did want to try and play Monster Reborn, because the way I play this deck, I do put a lot of really strong monsters in the graveyard that would actually be beneficial to revive. So I might still try and fit Monster Reborn in here. I just haven't figured out how to do it. But that is definitely something I would want to play. Just in theory. So extra deck there's 5 Link monsters. There's 2 Electromites, obviously. This card's great. I'm so glad they made this. It does so much for Pendulum. And Decode Talker, you link into this with Electromite and Absolute Dragon, which we'll get to later, and that makes you Vortex Dragon. Literally every Pendulum deck is doing it right now. And then I play Borreload and Saryuja. This deck actually has a surprisingly decent time putting 4 on the board for Link Summoning. So there have been games where I've been able to, if my hand is just loaded with monsters, I can just make Saryuja and just draw 4 and sculpt my hand. So if, by same theory, Borreload should be even easier to make. And if I feel like if a deck can make Borreload easily, it should probably start playing it, because this card's really good. So yeah, those are really all the Link monsters you need. I don't really think any other one is needed. You could maybe consider playing Underclock Taker, Underclock Taker for if your Electromite gets Reapered, but I'm not sure how necessary it would be. But it's definitely something to consider, because then, like, if you're about to make Electromite and they Reaper you, you can make Underclock Taker to put the stuff in the extra deck to Pendulum Summon, and then if they kill the Underclock Taker, you have a freed up extra monster zone again. So I don't know. That actually might be something to consider. I might make room for that. I don't think I necessarily need everything in this extra deck, but it's also kind of tight just because for Synchros I play Chao Feng. This is a level 9. So originally when I built the deck, I was trying to end on him as much as possible, because like, oh, 2800 beater, that if I pop him with the counter trap, I search a hand trap. And then I realized it's kind of not that good, because sure, I hit them with 2 disruptions, but then I'm left with nothing. So I think a lot of the times I'd rather just like sit on the Zefra and then like pop that and then search a Zefra Providence to do a play next turn. So generally I only make Chao Feng if I also have a way to make a level 7 Synchro. That way I can set up something else along with the Chao Feng and then pop the Chao Feng and have another disruption, but then also have another play for the next turn. So Yazi would be a lot better if we had Needlefiber, but still really good for just non-targeting spot removal and stuff. Black Rose, because nukes. Metaphys Horus. This is just because you can summon Zefraxi with either of the Ritual Beasts, and then you can make him, and then his effect is target a face-up card in the field and negate its effects, which is always nice. And then there's Pendulum Monster, where your opponent gives you control of one of their monsters, so that's good for just like link plays and disruption and stuff. So I can see this coming up, it's just I haven't actually made it yet, but I can see him being useful. And then here's the crazy part. I go hard on the Odd Eyes engine. I play 2 Meteor Bursts, 2 Absolute Dragons, 1 Raging Dragon, and 1 Vortex Dragon. So that part's obvious, and that guy. So if you can make a level 7 Synchro, you make Meteor Burst, you summon the Gate 0, you make him, and then you link with the Electromite to make Decode, and you make Vortex Dragon. So the reason I'm playing all of these guys is that I feel like this deck can level 7 Synchro so much, and even though Yazi and Black Rose are both good and have their uses, I think it's just as crazy of an idea to make another Meteor Burst, summon another Gate 0, make another Absolute, attempt to swing with anything, negate, revive a Vortex Dragon if it died, or you could just revive the Meteor Burst. And then when this Absolute dies, you can summon Odd Eyes Raging Dragon, which is just a constant scale for you. Because like you can scale it, or like you can, if it dies, you can Pendulum back and you can scale it again. So on paper, that seems really good, and I can see it coming up, but I just have to actually play games to test it. So that's why I ended up doing that. If I were to fit in Underclock Taker, I would probably... It's actually a tough choice. Maybe Metaphys Horus, but I could still see him being useful for sure. So like maybe either Borreload or Saryuja. Saryuja is like really nice, but I don't know how often it really comes up, so I might have to think about that. But that's the extra deck. And then the side deck, this is a completely tentative side deck. This is more like, it's the beginning of the format. I have no idea what's going on. So if I were to go to a tournament right now, this is what I think would be most generically useful. And that would be the other 2 hand traps, Veiler and Ghost Ogre, just to hit the other matchups. Like against Magician, I would side both of these and take out Ash. Against Draco, I would keep Ash and side an Ogre. Against Lightsworn, I'd keep Ash and side Veiler, yada yada yada. And then against Trickstar, I think I would just rely on Ash. And like maybe feel lucky with Veiler, but probably not, because they probably have Lycris. And then Cosmic Cyclone, because Anti-Spell's a bitch. Dimensional Barrier, just for going first against other Pendulum decks. This seems too unfair to not use against anything that relies on a specific summoning mechanic, honestly. That's not Link, which is like without Spiral. There's not really a lot that's just Link reliant. I guess like Trickstars and True Drakers are the 2 decks I wouldn't put that in against. And then Evenly Matched, because this card is unfair. And I would probably consider playing Called by the Grave or Designator from the Grave, whatever it's called, when it comes out, just because I feel like this deck, along with a lot of current Pendulum decks, would get fucked by Droll and Lockbird. So yeah, that's the entire deck. It's definitely still in testing, and I'm going to mess around with it more. This was a really long video because I wanted to explain how everything works. Zefra is not a very common deck in the TCG right now, but I think it is potent and it can do things. And especially when it gets Needlefiber, this is going to be one of the best decks in the game. It's like doing really well in the OCG right now, for example. So You know, like really, Needlefiber just has this deck go off. It's crazy what it can set up with that card. So yeah, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I have other deck profiles I want to do because, like I said, I'm building a lot of shit right now because with Spiral out of the way, like my brain's just going with a bunch of different ideas I had. So yeah, thanks for watching YouTube, and we'll see you next time.